Welcome to Technology Tangents. We get leaders together to discuss the important tech of today and the implications for tomorrow, but hopefully gives you a sense of what matters, what to pay attention to, and what to ignore. Hello, Jason and Kevin. How are you guys today?
Good. Good morning.
Good morning. I have some exciting news to share. The exciting news for our listeners here is that we are going to rebrand Technology Tangents. It will soon become Pure Signal. Everything on the podcast app should automatically take place for you, so you don't have to do anything, but you might notice a different logo, a different name, obviously. It'll still be the three of us. We're going to add a little bit more structure to the actual podcasting format. We're going to add some new sections at the end of it that are kind of fun, but broadly it'll be the same topic, same sort of lighthearted, jovial, sometimes serious conversations that we engage in. But just wanted to give everybody a heads up on that.
So this will be the last one, right?
This will be the last Technology Tangents. The next episode, then everything will get rebranded. We'll remind those, if you missed this episode, you won't hear this either. But if you do miss it, then we will remind those people as well that is actually Technology Tangents, just rebranded. Any exciting things from that standpoint, Jason, that you want to share about what you're looking forward to?
I like the new logo much better.
New logo, yeah, okay.
Yes.
A little bit better. I like it. Okay. Yeah, I think it'll be fun. We have a new production company, and so they're helping us out with this stuff. Kevin, any other thoughts on that? Or
well, less random walk, I suppose. If we're going to be Pure Signal, we're going to cut through the noise and less tangents, and so there you go.
That's right. Fewer fishing stories. So before the end of today, we have to get the fishing story.
Yeah, we'll have to get a few more in today. Boat driving and all those good stuff. So
yeah.
But I have to say that is not what I thought was going to be the exciting news that you were going to share. I am sitting in the presence of two best-selling authors, and I want to congratulate both of you for the amazing new book and love for you to talk about that a little bit.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's true. Yeah, so we have a new book for our listeners. If you haven't been following us on LinkedIn, then what are you doing? No, I'm kidding. But we have a new book. It's called The Intelligent Enterprise. Jason and I have spent the past couple weeks writing that, using AI to do everything. No, not really. Actually, we started, 18 months ago almost? Sort of
August. It was August of...
Oh, yeah, August. That's right.
23.
Mm-hmm. And we thought we'd have it done by December.
Yeah, that was a little...
23.
Yeah, a little overly optimistic.
Of 2 years ago. And it really did take a lot of work. Honestly, we had so much dribble on this podcast that we thought, look, we have hundreds of thousands of words that have been spilled in service of AI, in service of technology, in service of how do you develop business strategies in the context of AI. We really thought it'd be a pretty simple repackaging of content we already had. It turned out not to be so easy to repackage that content in a sort of comprehensive way, and it actually exposed a few areas that we haven't really talked a lot about on the podcast. Hopefully we can start incorporating that over the coming months. We'll try and bring in some of those topics from the book and talk a bit more in depth about it. But that was really a journey, I would say, to develop that. But it was fun doing it with you, Jason.
I was going to use a different word, but than fun. But no, it was fun. But there were, we underestimated how much Vincent wanted a certain style and tone of voice, and that is a little bit more. It's kind of like the podcast thing. His is like a little bit more tangents, a little bit more weaving in and out.
That's true.
Mine was more very structured and.
That's actually pretty fun.
In finding a happy medium where we could tell stories, essentially the premise of the book is that really specifically, your data, it's got a lot of value. AI is a way to unlock a lot of that value, but most people don't actually do that. They don't get any value out of either their data or any of the AI tools. Why is that, and what should you do about it, right? And it's really more of I think you called it a primer for executives, right? That want to understand how to get value out of these things. And we do it by telling a lot of real client stories. And, so finding a happy medium to weave in stories and tangents versus, having a narrative was about 16 of the 18 months of me and Vincent arguing, I think.
It was so funny because I'd have this vision of what the chapter should talk about, chapters that were more narrative. And I'd write all this great stuff that, let's talk about why it's different this time. And so we'd write a bunch of stuff, and then Jason would would review that and he'd say, yeah, this looks good, but you didn't actually answer any of the questions you set out to answer at this chapter. And I said, what do you mean? I've told all these great stories. And he'd be like, no, you said you were going to address this question. Where have you addressed that question? I'm like, well, it's implied in the story. And so it was a really great experience for me, to work with Jason more closely in this sort of creative form, not unlike programming, but a different form of creativity, where Jason's sort of rigorous analytical and architectural systems thinking really came through. And it was really fun to sort of see that process as I was trying to do my meander and maybe end up in roughly the right place for him to come along. No, it looks like this. So by the end, we got in a much better rhythm of, hey, here are some stories we might tell. Jason would kind of architect the chapter outline conceptually. And then it'd be like, how do we weave these pieces in? And that worked a lot better. But it did take us a while to figure out that working methodology.
Mm-hmm.
Well, a couple of quick thoughts. Obviously I've been with you guys throughout the process. It's still a little sad that I wasn't included in the book making process, but
there wasn't room on the cover
room.
for three
understand
titles.
That. But what was interesting to me is a couple things. I'd read and been part of some of the stuff, and then I just happened to have about 40 hours of flight time, so I had nothing else to do over the last week, and so I reread it, and I felt I think it's always interesting to to read something of your friends, and so you hear their voices, and so that was just kind of novel for me my first experience really of having a close friends that wrote a book and having that. But yeah, I think the timing actually really worked out in your favor because it's really, I think if it would have come out in December or January of 23, 24, the world would have been still talking about AI POCs, and it would have been very much around the generic elements of that. And I think whereas today, where the world is focused on use cases, I think it better understands the importance of your data, your infrastructure, your security, privacy things. A lot of these themes that I think maybe 12, 18 months ago would have gotten kind of just washed away as, oh, you're just trying to sell the old stuff, where today, really the build up for the last 10, 15 years to really get us to this moment to make the current themes of AI work are still a lot of those themes. And so I think that hit me more, that I think companies are asking these questions more what they get to it. And then, so I think that was just timely for me. And then just really around just the consistent reminder of, as the world speeds up, that you still have to have a solid infrastructure. And in this case, it's got to be really basic on building blocks of data, infrastructure, processes, policies, security. And those are what makes everything work faster. And then just from a pure, I didn't know this until I read the book. I just loved the tee-ups of the quotes. I thought that was very clever. And,
that was all Jason.
And very amazing. Enjoyed that and teeing up. And then, Jason, to your comment a few seconds ago, Vincent does this every day in our job. He says something and then meanders and gets back to it. Why would we expect that to be different in the book?
Yeah. So true. Sure. Yes. Single-minded porpoise over here, just there's one way to work. It's all I can do is that one thing. And no, the quotes were amazing. I loved the quotes. I think that was very much a Jason thing. As working with Jason, as he has all these like quips every day in every situation. There's a quip my grandpa used to say, or so and so.
Where was the Reacher quotes in the? There should have been something from the fandom that you read, not just simply the.
Yeah, I've thought about some Reacher or Gray Man quotes, but I went with more professional.
Well, okay. Well, maybe that's book 2.
Maybe.
Well, enough shameless plugging. Yeah, thank you for reading it. Thank you, Jason, for all the hard work and partnering with me and doing that. It would not have
thanks
happened.
For your patience with me of making you rewrite things and restructure things.
It was helpful, I think, and I think makes for a better experience overall.
I was quite surprised that we got the #1 best-selling in information technology,
and business strategy, both categories.
Oh, I didn't see that one.
The business strategy.
I've been on vacation for the last week, so I haven't seen. But no, I was surprised by that.
It's been great. It's been fun. We'll pick this up next time, or in a future one. Maybe not next time, but in the future podcast, we'll try and break down and we can get through some of these topics in more depth. What was covered in the book. But if you want to check out the book, theintelligententerprise.ai. Actually, we'll get you a webpage dedicated to it, and you get linked out to wherever you want to buy that. So moving on from there, I want to talk today about Adobe and the summit that they had there. That's where you attended. I want to talk about NVIDIA and GTC, which Jason and I attended, and some of the themes that come out of that. And you just took a trip back from India this past week that I'd love to get into a little bit as well. Sound good?
Right. As long as we make sure we get fishing at the end.
Yeah, exactly. So maybe we start off with NVIDIA.
Yeah.
So NVIDIA GTC this year, Jason and I both attended. And you'd never been before, right? I had never been. Okay, so neither of us had ever been to this conference. I mean, and why would we, right? This is a hardware producing, maybe if you're a game studio, you want to understand what's happening with graphics, how far can you push that? Or obviously if you're a cloud provider or a colo provider, certainly that would be interesting. But what was so different this year is it was really focused around a very different audience. In fact, it was an enormous audience this year. Maybe just give us some of your highlights of what happened this year and what made it different. Why did you want to go?
I had seen some of the things that they had published around their enterprise platform, like the Nemo platform and the NIMS, and I thought that's a really interesting. I've always thought that NVIDIA is one of their key advantages was CUDA, the software library, and that has got most tools locked into the NVIDIA hardware platform. It's that software layer. And they have been publishing more enterprise software layers, more APIs to do things like physics and financial modeling. And so I was just really interested to see some of those enterprise software applications. And so I thought I would be off in the corner, right, with the software people, where the main body was, all of the hardware and some of that robotics and the new Blackwell chip and all the data center infrastructure. What it turned out to be was a huge audience of enterprise software people. And that was really surprising. And again, most of the topics were things like you mentioned about in the book, that is like having good foundations of infrastructure that is scalable, data, able to process data, security, how to fit into the rest of the enterprise, in a lot, data privacy, and a lot of these things that, companies that use these tools have to focus on, right? If you're, an airline or a restaurant or, McDonald's or American Airlines or someone like that, and you want to use these tools, like those are real considerations. How do I get integrated with my existing systems? How do I make use of my existing data? How do I do this securely? How do I make sure that my IP is protected, that we don't have, hallucinations or other things cause business problems, all of those type of issues. Again, that's what we focus largely on the book, of being like, those are the things that you've got to really do. That was what the conference was largely about. I mean, of course, there were the hardware announcements and all those kind of things. It was just really interesting for me to see NVIDIA, I think, really taking a step into the less of a hardware manufacturer, more as an enterprise solution provider.
Yeah, I think that's a really good call out. They really have moved up stack effectively from that base layer of just architectural hardware to really building that CUDA network, which again, Andreessen Horowitz specifically even said from their standpoint, they were not investing in other silicon-based companies because they thought the moat around CUDA was too high to overcome. So while somebody else could design a new version of an AI first sort of chip, everything has been implemented using CUDA. And so that requires rewriting a huge amount of the infrastructure and stack that would have to be to get the real use out of those chips. And that's been in the decades they've spent doing that thing. So it's just a really difficult moat to overcome. But the really interesting thing to me is exactly what you said. Executives, enterprises who are going to use the software on top of all this were really interested in coming. In fact, this year, over 25,000 people attended GTC. Last year, for perspective,
I think all of them were in the Uber line in front of us after each day.
No doubt. Yeah, last year it was less than 15,000. So a huge jump in the number of people attending. And I think that speaks volumes to just the nature of the pervasiveness, rather, of AI throughout organizations, and all of that being written on CUDA, which is designed for NVIDIA GPUs specifically. And so that was quite remarkable. I will say the thing that stuck out to me, though, throughout the conference numerous times is that growth, more than doubling, has led to, at least for the conference, a lot of logistical challenges. That conference as an attendee was suboptimal. To be generous, it was suboptimal. I mean, it was really difficult to get around. The lines for, if you wanted to go to a talk, you'd have to skip the previous talk and then line up at that moment. So you miss every other talk just to get in line. You had to walk around outside. It was raining on the first day. The food was all outside. It was raining on the first. So it just was a really difficult place. That made me wonder, with the explosive growth that NVIDIA has seen, what is the internal mechanism of that company to stay good, to stay relevant, to stay cutting edge when you have to grow that quickly? It reminded me of my early days at Uber, where we were doubling every 6 months roughly in both employee count, but also more importantly in revenue. And it was a really chaotic environment. It was really fascinating to watch how that company at least managed to sustain that for a fair amount of time. It was quite remarkable. I didn't get that impression from at least the conference organizer portion of NVIDIA. And again, it's just a conference. It's probably not a huge deal that it wasn't well organized. It's not an indictment necessarily of the organization, but it did raise questions in my mind of like, how are they managing this kind of explosive interest and growth and pivoting from a pure hardware play to much more software first play? And I think that was really interesting to me as well. The last piece I would add is that, and actually we're both in the waitlist for this now, they released effectively a desktop supercomputer. So I think Jensen Huang's idea, his vision, as he said from the main stage, was, look, every data scientist is going to walk around with their bag, and in their bag's going to be a MacBook Pro, of course, what everybody has, in this little device. It's called a Spark. And it's basically just like, it looks like a little Mac Mini kind of in terms of size. And it effectively has an incredible amount of compute on the, it's literally a little supercomputer that you would just sort of plug in. And so I think that was the other interesting thing, is this world where maybe you need additional hardware if you want to be a data scientist, where you could do these things, and it's portable enough now that what effectively is in data centers one generation ago is now small enough, portable enough, low enough power that you can carry it around. Pretty cool.
No security issues.
No, it's fine. Yeah, don't worry about it. That's fine. No, it's fine.
Well, I think it's back to the theme of, to your point, Kevin, of like, we're moving out of the POC phase into the, how do we make these things, production systems, with all the production grade, controls and processes and scale, performance. I mean, there were a lot of talks on scale and performance, but, that may be, that is, if you think about scale being not just like the ability to grow, but to be able to grow cost effectively, right? Moving things out to the edge is a huge part of that. And I think that's just one of many things we saw there, where there's, an attempt to push a lot of things to the edge. Robots and robotics being the ultimate expression of that, right? Edge compute. But there were a lot of other things as well. And I think, again, you're going to see, if you think about something from the edge all the way to the data center, it's like, where's the right place to do something, right? And I think there's no one answer to that. It depends on what you're doing, and the right place may be, very centralized. The right place may be very distributed. But I think they've realized that, and they're trying to build a platform that will kind of service all those needs, like, to do those kind of AI, machine learning computations or workloads wherever they need to be, with all of the, ilities around it, reliability and security, those top things. And so, again, I think it's a real exciting time for them.
Yeah, amazing.
I'd be interested, Jason, and you may have been sharing some of it, but I think I've heard you talk several times over the last couple of weeks around just kind of the impact of Jensen's keynote. I didn't know if there's any other themes that you wanted to kind of highlight, particularly, just maybe even continue to go down the fact that there's just themes that are in the book and other things that, that just have taken a bit to now to where maybe are resonating with people, but it seemed like that was potentially pretty impactful for you.
Yeah, I think the keynote was really organized around use cases, or workloads, to use a different phrase, but essentially less around, the thing. I always say no one wants a drill, they want a hole, right? It's less around the thing that black belt chips, although, there was information about the hardware. Just the information about the hardware was just how big and how powerful the compute is gotten, which is, it's pretty incredible, that little, Apple TV sized device has a
petaflop
of, which is a
I
number.
mean, that's like in-car scale back in the day. Like
Right.
when I was going to grad school, or actually as undergrad, I did a project with in-car, and they had these sort of cluster of the supercomputer they had built to do ocean modeling, pop ocean modeling. And it was less than a petaflop of total compute. And this thing, took up an entire building. It was incredibly expensive, hundreds of millions of dollars. And now to think like, wow, just like that
Inside
more
an
powerful
Apple
now
TV,
sits in this tiny
yeah.
little box sitting at on my desk in my office. I get the thing that powered the lunar module is less powerful than my Apple Watch, and I get it in some sense, but I think this was the first time that I really internalized just how much scale these things have.
Yeah,
nowadays.
the Moore's Law scale. But there was so much focus on whether it was gaming or robotics or use cases within the enterprise around how they're focusing on these workloads, these use cases that are which again a big theme in the book. Not to keep plugging the book, but it's like these are not technologies for technology's sake. We're not building the best drill, to build the best drill to beat that guy better than that guy's drill or that company's drill. It's like there's real uses for these things that drive a tremendous amount of value, and that's what they enable you to capture.
I think that to me is exactly what differentiated when we did our forecasting for what will happen in 25. I think moving to the world where people can see the actual value from these AI models is this year. And I think that was reiterated at the event. And secondly, not to say two things were right in the prediction model, but I think they were. Robotics was a really big deal. And so robotics, that is, we finally have this moment when we can fuse data. We talked about this on the pod before, but where we can fuse data from multiple inputs. So somebody can train it manually by programming. Somebody can tell it which coordinates and which motors to turn on for how long. Somebody can give it an instruction manual saying, here's how you load a dishwasher conceptually. Somebody can show it videos from YouTube. Somebody can talk to it and tell it how to refine that. All of those signals.
And they have a large simulation platform.
That's right. And then you can simulate it in a virtualized environment. Well, now we have a way of actually taking data from all those different input types and let a model learn from all of that simultaneously. And what you're seeing is that the early days of that is incredibly powerful. And so we're getting to a world where humanoid type robots are actually quite possible, or bipedal robots or quad robots are quite possible as well. And so I think that's going to be, I don't think it'll happen this year precisely, but I do think that in the next couple of years, certainly while we're alive, we're going to see a huge shift in what that looks like broadly.
Well, I thought it was interesting about the humanoid robotics is just some of the images that came out of China this weekend around manufacturing, or again, what is real, what's not real.
Yeah.
But what was intriguing to me, besides just seeing a traditional line where you've got a bunch of humanoid robots, my first thought was well, why would I design a line where I would have humanoid robots versus just designing it for pure robotics? But so that again, what is real, what is not. But it was just intriguing to see that in real time, just of okay, this is really where, even if that is the first approach, you instead of redesigning how you manufacture, you just replace one thing with something else. But it was just fascinating to see how real and how just the movement and element of how that plays out. So it's coming fast.
No doubt it's coming fast. And I think this is where I think we're going to see a lot of both special purpose robots, like you're saying on an assembly line today. We have these sort of new arms, for example, that can do one specific thing, to autonomous vehicles, again, specialized, all the way to this sort of general purpose humanoid like robots, right? And I think humanoid is the right form factor simply because our world has been designed around us,
right,
humans. And so you don't have to overcome some of the challenges you do with other formats. But I do think that general purpose robotics is going to be a big deal. And we should do a pod on this and just how that all breaks apart. But pivoting, before we run out of time here, I want to switch from NVIDIA's GTC, which was the biggest ever, lots of logistical problems, lots of business people showing up to understand how will this impact me, to Adobe Summit, where the business marketing type people usually go. How did that go for you this year?
Yeah. And I'll just, full disclosure, it was my first time there. So in that sense, it was new to me, but from, some key themes from my experience, but then also from just folks that have been there for many, many times. So one, the word Adobe and AI, you could probably argue which one was said most in all the keynotes and the panels and working through that. So very keen, just even, how how a user community will use their product and how it's going to continue to be impacted by AI. I think the general perspective is that there was less people there, and there was less probably just interested folks. So, and more, the people that were there were more focused. And so from our perspective, we had great conversations, lots of really great dialogue with our clients, prospective clients. It was very focused, very serious. So in that sense, it was a success for that, and I'm excited that we were there, and felt like it was a good use of our time. But the feedback from other folks that the general traffic at booths, or just kind of folks that maybe would be more just interested, that was the place to go to be at the conference. And obviously, they're back to back through the same days. And so it's possible that maybe some of the general business type folks that would have been Adobe prior were at the NVIDIA conference. It's hard to know that, but it was definitely, generally the perspective was that the audience and the attendance was down. And so that was intriguing. Yeah, I think it's just even thinking about, let's just assume for a second that's a correlated event. I think it's kind of interesting to me just around the idea of where do we go to learn and what do we want to do, and how does a product that's got a very specific use case versus something that's more general, how you build off something. I think those themes to me were kind of interesting, and I think so. Yeah, that's kind of my observation, and it was just kind of intriguing that they're both the same week and how that played out.
Yeah, I do think some CEOs must have had some phone calls about this exact thing, both sort of their pinnacle events of the year, of course, for those respective companies. And it's interesting to see how that ended up panning out and what'll be done differently next year as a result. But I think the meta point there is really fascinating, which is NVIDIA is obviously a really hot company. Their stock went through the roof, obviously. Everybody's talking about them. AI being so ubiquitous, all of that being powered by NVIDIA chips specifically, makes them the cool kid in the club. How does this typically play out from you guys' perspective? Meaning, in the end, if we fast forward 5 or 10 years when the hype has died down, do people continue to go to NVIDIA where it's the foundational capability and technology? Or do they spend most of their dollars to then go to the bespoke solutions like Adobe, who's implemented that using all that core technology? How do you see that? How do you think that'll play out over time? Jason, any thoughts?
Well, I tend to think that the software providers, the third-party software vendors like Adobe or Salesforce or any of those, they have a set of problems they're trying to solve. Mm-hmm. Right? You buy software, it does a thing. You buy Excel to build spreadsheets. You buy Outlook to check email and manage your calendar, and you buy these software products. And in a lot of ways, a lot of what eventually at some point, those software providers, it becomes a solved problem. There's not a whole lot of innovation in accounting software, right? Because it does what it does. There's not a need to, there is a need to continue to invest and make sure it works and is, scalable, performant, and that kind of thing. And there are some on the edges abilities to adopt things like, some chat AI to ask questions and do reporting. The fundamentals of managing your books haven't really changed much in the last 100 years. And, whereas you focus on something like that is more of a broad scale platform, some solutions are a platform, right? And I think that's what, NVIDIA is trying to become like, previously, if you think about Oracle and the J2E platforms and other platforms, they're things that you use to build, bespoke solutions on. And I think right now, just the ability, what a lot of the AI tools have done is made it more affordable to build like really targeted custom solutions. I mean, you hear people like Satya Nadella say, oh, SaaS is dead. I don't know that SaaS is dead, but if you need, there are a lot of people that need these big point solutions, Adobe, Salesforce, and, ERP, SAP, those kind of things. But there are a lot of people that don't, and these platforms give them an ability, and AI to, with a lot of the code generation and other type of, productivity enhancements, give you the ability to be cost effective in building your own solutions. And I think that pendulum always swings back and forth between those things. Someone will then build a a product that's a better mousetrap, it will swing back. And I think Adobe, Salesforce would argue their platforms, and they are to some extent, but again, their platforms designed around solving very specific problems. And so I think there's if you think of it as two different axes, right? One axis is custom versus off the shelf software. That pendulum always swings back and forth. And then you have the access of general purpose platform versus very custom solution to do certain things, and that one swings back. And I think right now what you just have is both pendulums swinging into the whatever quadrant that would be of custom platform, not third party, very point oriented solutions, right? And that's what I would think. That would be my guess as to why the people were choosing to go, if that is the case, that people are choosing to go to one over the other. But I think that's generally true in the industry. I mean, you see all the vibe coding stuff and like, oh, I built these applications in a day and that kind of thing. Well, what you need are platforms to run all of those things. A lot of the agent stuff, like we build all these cool agents to, look at my email and respond to or an agents to respond to all the trouble tickets or whatever it is. Well, you need a platform to run those more general purpose agents. And so that's, the pendulum is swinging that way. And, maybe the AI advancements keep it over there a long time versus point solutions. I don't know.
I think what might be interesting too is that I think we just seen, different innovation stages, right? Just even the amount in our own business, how much more, we've been talking about AI for 2-3 years and really 10 years prior to that, but how much we've seen it just really, now it's at the forefront of every single thing we're doing, even though you guys have been pushing that for so long. I think it's a measurably difference in the way that we are doing our business and where our clients are expected to do business, how that plays out. That's really happened for us over the last 3 or 4 or 5 months. And I would say that we're even late to the game from some of the other elements. So it's possible that as companies have adopted so much quicker and you've gone from the possible to, I got to figure this out, that, NVIDIA is on the hardware side. That was the original purpose, but potentially that just became, that was the first big thing on the calendar where you could go, and I'm intrigued a bit. You've got Adobe, you've got Dreamforce, but really reInvent's the next big one. Yeah. And I'd be curious on how Google just happened as well. But I mean, you think about like where is the back half of the year? It'd be intriguing, and then you obviously leads into CES. So you think about these calendar events of where do people go to get information and just to really around. Whereas I'm sure there's tons of boutique, AI conferences that are out there. But there's the fact that NVIDIA's got such a brand name because of the stock, as you mentioned, Vincent, that's possibly just was right place, right time. It's actually now evolving to more of a broader industry event versus just simply their product. And I'm intrigued to see how that will play out as, just as the use cases continue to grow, as we start having them, or just even like the perspective of like the general populace understanding, the agent driven, what that means. I mean, I think that even just in the last number of, months, that's become, much more understood what that plays out. And, I would have never thought, hey, having, Copilot be looking at my email, responding. That's how I would have responded to that and said that, 60 days ago. Well, now I have an agent. It's very much the nomenclature of how we talk is changing as we speak.
Mm-hmm. It's a good point about, when you talk about the platforms, AWS probably being the largest example of that platform. They've got, again, starting more in the hardware. We're going to offer virtual machines and storage and building blocks to now they have literally hundreds of solutions that are platforms essentially as a service to drive everything from if you want IoT to other solutions. They've been working to embed obviously AI into all of them. They have actually solutions for buildings, AI based solutions with SageMaker, Bedrock, all of those platforms. And so my guess is you're going to see that conference, which is in November, be even more crowded than it already is. It takes up 5 or 6 hotels, and in Vegas, maybe it takes up 7 or 8 hotels, but in a similar set of themes, right? How do we move these things from POC. Now we've got these platforms. How do we move them into real production use case and drive our business?
Yeah, I think you're right. The brand of NVIDIA for this conference was probably just a signal that what we want to talk about is AI. They're going to obviously have to talk about AI at that conference, right? And so that sort of led to a huge influx of people, whereas Adobe maybe not, right? Maybe it just says, well, it's Adobe. We use it. We're going to keep using it. They probably have some new features, but the people who attended then really cared about Adobe, not the general premise of generative AI specifically, right? And so that's a good call out. I think that's probably right. I want to go back. We should do a whole episode on this SaaS is dead thing. I want to unpack that a bit. I'm not sure we're entirely aligned on this point, so it might be fun for us to discuss. But I think it seems to me that there is this opportunity to redefine the stack broadly. And that's because the productivity gains, the efficiency gains, but also the new things you can do using Gen AI demand that the entire stack be rewritten and recontemplated about where do you buy and what do you buy. So I can imagine a world where the AI itself, whatever platform that is, becomes the SaaS vendor conceptually. Because today, if you think about what Salesforce or Adobe largely do, it's just connecting data in a very opinionated way that enable a bunch of functionality and little micro applications conceptually. If the AI can do all of that data management, munging, processing in a bespoke way, then the question to me is, well, what's the difference between these two solutions? One's more opinionated, that's worth something, but it also costs more. One could be a bit more bespoke, less opinionated, but costs less or is already integrated. I think there's an interesting question here, like how does that play out and evolve over time?
Well, the question there is how do you define SaaS, right?
Correct.
Like what you're describing is what I would call it's a platform as a service, right? And
well, but I think it holds true in other contexts too, right? I mean, choose your favorite, choose TurboTax, choose any SaaS vendor really. And I think the same question becomes, look, the reason that a company typically buys SaaS, and Kevin, we perspective from a strategy standpoint, the reason we buy SaaS is because it gives us the answer that we need, cheaper, faster, and better than we could build ourselves. On the other hand, it's never a perfect fit.
right.
It does 98%. If you could tweak one or two things, you would, but the cost of that is prohibitively expensive. If the cost of building a bespoke solution is actually cheaper than the traditional SaaS solution, well, then I think the pendulum swings the other way. So what I think will inevitably...
Why do you say we're on different sides of this issue? I thought that's what I was saying.
Well, I just think that your point was like, is SaaS dead? My question is like, well, I think that in SaaS in its current manifestation is dead. I think that either SaaS has to be driven to a commodity play where the margins and the PD ratios have to get squeezed to commodity levels, and this sort of pricing and future earnings goes
Things like
to
email.
That's right. Yeah, effectively like email. Like, what do you make on an email? Like nothing. Why? Because it's so easy to make so many competition. In this case, actually, it's a consolidation play. But you can imagine in the future, there's a proliferation of applications, a bit like the App Store. Like, how much can you really charge on the App Store for anything? There's so much competition that not a huge amount. Unless you have a really cool, great solution, different story. But I think that's where, in my mind, when I hear Satya say SaaS is dead, that's what I think of. I think of, yes, the platform play becomes a massive problem. That's probably what he's referencing by and large. But I think even the sort of tighter, more traditional SaaS offerings are in great question. I mean, we saw, for example, MyFitnessPal. Again, I'm thinking apps, I guess, but still, it's a SaaS play. MyFitnessPal is by and away the largest sort of fitness, meal tracking, nutrition tracking app for, I don't know, years. I don't know how long, but for years, no doubt. Some kid who had, very little background, he was still in college, wrote a new app that went entirely viral. He has disrupted that entire business in a radical way. I mean, this guy literally, used AI, wrote the whole app. He even had some like clever features about taking a photo and estimating how many calories in that meal. As somebody who's tried it, it's not very good, but like conceptually, all really cool stuff. He became the largest app, fastest downloaded app, all these things, and has, $100+ million business that he built on the scale of months. And that to me, I think is the moment we're at, is like, if a SaaS vendor doesn't incorporate these quickly, it will be better for most companies to build their own because they're wanting desperately to have those features. And there's a moment when you can arbitrage the delta in the marketplace and get competitive advantage. And so that's why I say the whole stack has to be written, which gives us the opportunity to reevaluate and reassess what is the best solution for me. And if it really is true that you can build a bespoke solution faster, then you might choose that.
But again, I'm just...
You're on the same side.
Yeah, because I said we're swinging back into the platform and custom side of the thing, and so I'm not sure where we disagree.
Okay. Well, you said
that's good. You guys are
we're in violent agreement as usual.
Yes, you guys are singing Kumbaya. You're writing books together.
That's right.
Next, you know that Vincent will go fishing with you. But
I doubt that.
You doubt that. Well, but before one thing, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
before we get into that, I think one thing that's interesting to me about both Microsoft and probably AWS is Power Builder with a bunch of agents, how much different that is a SaaS provider. And so right. I mean, I think same thing with all the different features with AWS. So I think that partly, not to saying that the comments are meant to be competitive in nature, but I think you're going to have other competing things besides making custom AI solutions. I mean, there's just going to be other tools that are going to come from different sources that are going to start to really creating a competitive landscape that will have to drive the price point down. And then, which again goes back to not to continue to plug the book, but the themes are going to still be ultimately data security and infrastructure. But I'm just fascinated a bit what Microsoft's doing right now with everything from what they're doing with OpenAI to what they're doing with Power Builder, what they're doing with agents, what they're doing with Power Plants. I mean, it's really kind of intriguing, bringing, because that's the other thing I know we've talked about before, but I think, clean energy and to power this is also going to be really fascinating to see over that. Maybe we need to redo our 25 predictions, but it's going to be fascinating to see what happens with that, just based on what you need and where it comes from.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, and we just heard that it came public that China has yet another reactor in the nuclear space that we thought was effectively impossible to build. It's actually developed, it's a thorium reactor, just liquid salt reactor, and just found out they have them. So it's I think that power generation is going to be a huge competitive advantage or disadvantage at a national scale that will become increasingly obvious to, I think, the mainstream media, for lack of a better word, and become much more part of the public zeitgeist. I think that is undoubtedly true. And maybe this is the year that'll happen. I don't know. We'll see. But, okay, so let's pivot. Otherwise, we're going to run out of time. India was the last topic I wanted to get to, and then I want to hear about your fishing briefly here, Jason. But India, how was India?
India was good. Obviously it's a long ways to get there, but it was just fun to experience it. I hadn't been to our teams over there before, and so it was just kind of fun to see that. And just again, it's just a privilege to be able to work for a firm that where no matter where in the world you go and run into our employees, it feels like that the cultural notes are there. But what was intriguing to me in where our offices are there, I feel like it's Tech Vegas is what it kind of felt like, and so that is interesting to me. But just really, I found myself leaving and kind of thinking about themes of where does technical innovation come from? Where is technical? How does that play out? What do you expect within your global teams? What is it going to be in different centers? And so, I just think there's an opportunity there's such a concentration of technology talent there, and just what that looks like. And so other companies are much more mature than maybe we are at this point, but just an interesting element of that, of how you do R&D innovation. I still think it's a fascinating element of where would you have pockets of AI innovation? Where do you do that around the world? How do you do that effectively? And so maybe more questions than answers to this point, but just intrigued about what you would build as you think about traditional kind of large GCC models and what they are is many companies are building their own. What's the next evolution of that from a client service perspective? And I think you could do a lot more on some of the themes that we're talking about today. I think could be very interesting to have that be part of your core offerings over there, which is, again, not a unique thing for many companies, but I think for something that we get to go do and really encourage that more sense of driving technical advancement.
It's amazing. I mean, I'm curious, what was their perspective on AI more broadly? I mean, again, not necessarily any individual specifically, but just broadly, how is that country dealing with it? If I think back to my days at Microsoft, of course, had a huge dev center. Pretty early on, was 15, 20 years ago. The thing that always struck me about, of course, I did big data and AI. I think we called it mostly big data back then, machine learning and big data, was that they were always really, really keen to do the latest, greatest, coolest. In fact, in many ways, they were probably more advanced than my US counterparts. On the other hand, the way that company was structured, and this is true across not just Microsoft, but others at that moment in time anyway, is that we never gave them the cool stuff to work on. Effectively, we wanted all of the really cool cutting edge technology to stay in the US. We wanted them to do the sort of more mundane QA, test, that sort of skill set back then. I think I've seen that same desire to stay relevant and stay really cutting edge continue to persist in India when I've worked with those teams broadly. But the thing that makes India really fascinating at this moment, take that lens and then add to it, historically, the reason US companies in particular have used India is to arbitrage the cost of labor. You can get great people over there. In fact, they're graduating more CS majors than all of the US any given year. You can take that great labor and you can get them for a fraction of the cost. Well, everybody's realized this at this point, and they have huge dev centers over there. And now the cost of labor there is not significantly less. It's still a bit cheaper, but not significantly less than it does in other countries, the US specifically. When you then add the AI lens of like, are they going to be the ones who really continue to develop that? Or does AI end up replacing all of the labor that we do in terms of that arbitraging the marketplace? And India becomes much more focused on a whole new set of industries that are focused towards the specific India market. Where today most of their great labor is used in service of the rest of the world, do they become more inwardly focused sort of and focus on how do we drive India specifically? Did you get any flavors of how they're viewing these sort of competing forces at this moment in time?
No, there's a lot of good themes unpacked there. So maybe throw rapid fire a few things. One, I think that the services that's historical that you described, I think that, those are going to get, my opinion, those are going to get wiped out. So you either have to do exactly what you said. I mean, do you think about more internally the India market? Definitely more clear that was more prevalent in the last 6-8 months for me personally in my role, and than ever before. That how they're thinking about that, and it's really what does that mean? I thought it was interesting that trying to understand the usage of AI and what that looks like. That many of our employees were thinking more about AI in their spare time than they were in their day job. And so how does that work through that? What does that mean in implication for both us in terms of what skills and services we're asking of our team there, but also the fact that they're very curious and we're not taking advantage of that. And so I think it's, my takeaway, and again, these are raw thoughts, is that, I think our teams over there and maybe just writ large are going to continue to have to evolve into something different. And so what do I think the consulting market's going to, and the technical development market will increase for India? Yeah, I absolutely think it will. What does that mean for our centers and what does that look like? But also that I think we'd be foolish not to accelerate the change of how we use those teams. And for every firm, others included, you need to understand what your competitive advantage is, just like the themes we always talk about. And it's possible that you accelerate. So one of the things that we were talking a ton about and I left with, and maybe somewhat informed by my flight reading as well, is what is the next evolution of what a center looks like in India? If you have a center of thousands of technologists together, what do you want them to do? How would that play out in terms of how you run your business and work through it? And I actually came back encouraged and really with a way to re-envision, essentially, potentially, if you're a firm that's, the technology space, even the GCC concept, if I find is kind of interesting because I feel like that's an antiquated strategy, right? I'm going to take what I used to outsource in India and now bring it inside my own four walls. Like, okay, why don't you just use AI to knock the whole thing out? And so I think it's going to be interesting around what that looks like. On a personal or more cultural note, I just found myself kind of, as you still see in India, as it's developing through the stages of just development of the country, right? You still see that stratification of different roles and resources. I just found myself thinking, you have 1.4 billion people, roughly. I didn't do the real math, but somewhere between 15 to 18% of the world population in one spot. What is that going to look like in terms of how does it continue to go through the development curve? What are the opportunities that it creates for all its people, not just simply a certain technical advancements and skill sets? And so, I'm intrigued by that just as a fan of humanity and a fan of society of what that looks like. It's just fascinating. I was talking to my kids yesterday, trying to explain the population of India and China and what that means from the overall population of the world and what that looks like. And I think it's just a fascinating time to be alive to see what happens there over the next generation or two.
No doubt. Yeah, I think it'll be really fascinating when we add the extra complexity of tariffs and then potentially reshoring to different countries. That'll be a really added benefit or detriment, depending on how that ends up playing out, no doubt. Okay, we're almost out of time here. Jason, you've also been traveling this past week, although not for work, for a bit more personal. Tell what have you been up to?
Oh, well, I did a performance boat driving class. So
performance boat driving.
You can tune your system or you can tune your boat.
That's right.
Exactly.
What does that mean? Tell us more about that.
Well, probably no one wants to hear about this, but boat driving, it's like driving a car. You drive a car, everybody drives their car every day, but you can take these classes where you go and learn to drive a race car around a track and, take turns and push the limits of performance of the car, and how to do that safely. And so doing that in the boat, just, it's a fast boat. So I wanted to make sure I could A, drive it fast, but B, drive it fast and safely. So that was, it was,
I like how the safety is the second standard here. We're like,
Yeah.
going fast is the most
Safely
important.
fast.
Yeah.
There was the image this weekend, and there was one that was floating around, the boat that flipped over and it was going so fast, made me think of you. But do you help us understand how fast you're going? What's the implication of just going 5 or 6 more percentage points
about
faster?
70 miles.
70 miles.
75 miles.
70.
With like no seatbelt or airbags or helmet and okay.
Sounds like driving in India.
Yeah, no kidding. So how, was it fun? I mean, did you learn a
was
lot?
super fun.
Did you learn something?
Yeah,
Did you buy a new boat? Did you realize that it was a hardware problem?
No, it was not a hardware problem. It's definitely a what's the old thing? It's there was a short between the steering wheel and the seat. That was the problem.
That's
but
funny.
no, I about 10 miles an hour faster.
Wow.
That's incredible.
All right.
Did he feel more
Previously.
confident now too?
Yeah, much more so.
Okay.
That's cool. Well, we expect to have more podium results then.
Now you
we'll
can get
see.
the best fishing spots a little faster.
Yeah, that's right.
That'll help. Excellent. Well, again, thank you guys so much for joining. Thank you guys for listening. Again, next episode rather, the new Pure Signal brand will show up on all of the platforms you currently have. You don't have to do anything different. It'll just magically show up, apparently. Look forward to seeing you guys there. If you have more questions or want to follow up, visit the insights page at credera.com. Thank you.